Humans and Rizians were about to collide, in a meeting that would determine if either species would survive the Zorgon onslaught unleashed upon the galaxy. Charles Perry, grizzled human explorer and former space marine, pounded the flaming control panel of his crippled spacecraft, smoke filling the cabin as it spiraled towards the verdant alien world below. Atmosphere howled through gashes in the cockpit glass, a parting gift from the Zorgon starfighters that ambushed him at the fringes of their ever-expanding empire. The jungle canopy rushed up to meet him with alarming speed. Charles braced for impact, muscles tensed as the ship augured into the loamy soil, ploughing a deep furrow through the undergrowth. The human was slammed forward in his harness, head striking the console with a dull thud, as everything went black. Awareness returned slowly, a throbbing ache in his skull the first sensation to register. Charles fumbled with the release on his restraints, kicking the jammed hatch open and stumbling out into the alien landscape. Towering trees with leaves in shades of purple and crimson surrounded the smoking wreck, while creatures chirped and buzzed in the thick air. Charles retrieved his pack from the storage compartment, still miraculously intact. The sleek lines of his plasma rifle were a comfort as he slung it over his shoulder, machete strapped to his thigh. He had no idea if this planet harbored intelligent life, but he knew the Zorgons would soon come searching for his ship. He needed to find shelter, gather intel, and plan his next move. The human set out into the dense foliage, ears straining for any sign of danger. Suddenly the undergrowth rustled ahead, and Charles dropped into a crouch, rifle at the ready. He expected insectoid Zorgons to come bursting out, mandibles clacking, but instead, a small furry creature emerged, staring at him with wide, intelligent eyes. It resembled an otter from Earth, but with luminescent fur that sparkled in the dappled sunlight. The creature let out a series of chirps and whistles, and Charles lowered his weapon slightly. This was no Zorgon, that much was clear. The otter-like being took a hesitant step forward, head cocked to the side quizzically. Charles knew he needed allies if he was going to survive and strike back at the Zorgons, and this curious little creature might just be the key. He had no idea that this chance meeting would change the course of the war and the fate of the galaxy itself. The Rizians needed a champion, and Charles Perry was about to become the unlikely hero they had been waiting for. The Zorgons had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn the true meaning of humanity. Fuck yeah! Charles and Lyra crept through the dense undergrowth, the Rizians' luminescent fur providing a gentle glow in the darkness. They had spent weeks scouting Zorgon outposts, identifying weak points and supply routes. Tonight, they would strike. As they approached the perimeter of the mining camp, Charles readied his plasma rifle, the weapon humming with deadly energy. Lyra signaled to her fellow Rizians, hidden in the foliage around the camp. At Charles's nod, they burst into action. Charles fired precise shots, each bolt of plasma finding its mark in the chitinous hides of Zorgon guards. Lyra and the Rizians surged forward, their natural agility allowing them to evade the return fire. They planted explosive charges on the mining equipment, the detonation sending shrapnel and flames tearing through the camp. In the chaos, Charles and Lyra raced to the prisoner pens, blasting the locks and freeing the captured Rizians. Among them was Lyra's brother, Zane, his fur matted with blood, but his eyes burning with determination. "I knew you would come," he said, clasping Lyra's hand. As they made their escape, Charles paused to hurl a grenade into the camp's fuel depot, the resulting explosion lighting up the night sky. It was a message to the Zorgons. The Rizians would no longer be easy prey. In the weeks that followed, Charles and Lyra led strike after strike against the Zorgons. Charles taught the Rizians the finer points of marksmanship and close-quarters combat, while Lyra showed him how to navigate the treacherous jungle terrain and harness the planet's resources. Zane and his warriors proved invaluable, their knowledge of the Zorgons' tactics and supply lines guiding the rebels to victory. But the Zorgons would not be so easily defeated. They dispatched Commander Crag, a veteran of countless campaigns, his body a fusion of organic and cybernetic parts. Crag's response was brutal and swift, his forces razing villages and publicly executing prisoners as a warning to the rebels. Charles and Lyra barely escaped one such ambush, forced to watch helplessly as Zane was dragged away in chains. They knew they had to act fast. Gathering a small team of their most skilled fighters, they set out to infiltrate the heavily guarded Zorgon base where Zane was being held. Under cover of darkness, they slipped into the base through a network of underground tunnels, Rizian scouts leading the way. As they emerged into the main compound, alarms blared to life, and they found themselves in a fierce firefight with Zorgon guards. Charles was a whirlwind of motion, his plasma rifle spitting death as he dove from cover to cover. Lyra and her team fought with equal ferocity, their natural speed and agility a match for the Zorgon's brute strength. They pushed deeper into the base, finally locating the prison block where Zane and the others were being held. As they raced towards the hangar bay and their waiting escape vehicle, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Crag, his cybernetic arm glinting in the harsh light. "You will not leave this place alive," he growled, his voice a metallic rasp. Charles stepped forward, handing his rifle to Lyra. "Get the others to safety," he said, his eyes never leaving Crag. "I'll handle this." The two warriors clashed in a brutal melee, Crag's enhanced strength matched by Charles's skill and determination. They traded blows back and forth, neither giving ground. Charles ducked under a sweeping strike from Crag's cybernetic arm, coming up with a devastating uppercut that sent the Zorgon reeling. But Crag was far from finished. He lashed out with a kick that caught Charles in the chest, sending him tumbling across the hangar floor. Charles tasted blood, his ribs screaming in protest as he struggled to his feet. Crag stalked forward, his arm reconfiguring into a wicked blade. Charles met his charge head-on, grappling with the Zorgon commander in a desperate struggle. With a burst of strength, Charles wrenched Crag's arm to the side, the blade missing his throat by inches. He followed up with a headbutt that cracked the Zorgon's chitinous faceplate, sending him stumbling back. Charles pressed his advantage, raining blows down on Crag until the Zorgon collapsed, his cybernetic systems sparking and sputtering. Charles stood over his fallen foe, chest heaving with exertion, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Lyra was at his side in an instant, supporting him as they made their way to the waiting ship. As they lifted off, Charles looked out at the burning base, a grim smile on his face. They had struck a blow against the Zorgons today, but he knew the war was far from over. With Lyra and the Rizians by his side, he would continue to fight, to make the Zorgons pay for every inch of ground they had taken. As Lyra tended to his wounds, Charles felt a connection between them that went beyond mere comrades in arms. They had forged a bond in the heat of battle, a bond that would carry them through the dark days ahead. The Zorgons may have superior numbers and technology, but they had underestimated the power of the human spirit and the courage of the Rizian people. The resistance had grown, its victories fueling hope in the hearts of all those who suffered under Zorgon rule. But Charles knew that Crag was just the beginning, a herald of the greater challenges to come. The Zorgons would not rest until every last rebel was crushed beneath their heel. But Charles and Lyra would not rest either, not until their people were free, and the Zorgons were nothing more than a bitter memory. As Charles healed from his brutal clash with Crag, Lyra burst into the rebel hideout, her luminescent fur bristling with agitation. "The Zorgons are planning a massive invasion, led by the Emperor himself," she exclaimed, slamming a stolen datapad onto the table. "He wants to make an example of Rizia, to annihilate our people and strip the planet bare." Charles sat up, ignoring the pain lancing through his ribs. He scanned the intercepted communication, his jaw clenching as he read the Emperor's cruel orders. The stakes had never been higher. If they didn't act now, Rizia would be lost forever. "We need to strike at the heart of the Zorgon Empire," Charles said, his voice low and determined. "If we can infiltrate their homeworld and sabotage their main weapons factory, we might have a chance." Lyra nodded, her eyes blazing with resolve. "Zane and I will come with you. Thax can lead the defense here while we're gone." They wasted no time. Using a stolen Zorgon shuttle, they slipped through the homeworld's defenses, blending in with the regular traffic. As they landed in a seedy spaceport, Charles couldn't help but marvel at the towering spires and neon-lit streets of the Zorgon capital. It was a far cry from the lush jungles of Risia. Navigating the city's underbelly, they gathered intel on the factory's location and security measures. Charles's hand never strayed far from his plasma rifle, always on alert for trouble. In a dimly lit cantina, they made contact with Russia, the leader of a Zorgon rebel cell. Her exoskeleton was scarred from battles past, her compound eyes glinting with suspicion. "Why should we help you, human?" she hissed, her mandibles clicking. Charles leaned forward. "Because we both want the same thing. To see the Emperor fall, help us destroy that factory, and I swear I'll fight alongside your rebellion." Russia considered for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. We have the security codes you'll need, but if you betray us, I'll tear you apart myself." Under cover of darkness, they breached the factory's perimeter. Russia's insider knowledge proved invaluable as they planted explosives at key structural points. But just as they were about to detonate, all hell broke loose. The Emperor's elite guards swarmed their position, plasma bolts filling the air. Charles and his team fought back with everything they had, but they were badly outnumbered. Zane took a searing shot to the chest, collapsing in a heap. "Go," Russia shouted, laying down covering fire. "I'll hold them off." Charles wanted to argue, but there was no time. He scooped up Zane's limp form, Lyra providing cover as they raced for the exit. Behind them, Russia's defiant war cry echoed through the factory, followed by the deafening roar of the explosives detonating. They barely made it to the stolen fighter before the entire complex went up in a ball of flame. As they blasted into the sky, Charles felt a grim sense of satisfaction. They had struck a blow against the Zorgon war machine, but at a terrible cost. Zane groaned in the back seat, his luminescent blood staining the upholstery. Lyra cradled his head in her lap, her eyes wide with fear. "Hang on," Charles urged, pushing the fighter to its limits. "We'll get you help, just stay with us." But even as they raced back to Risia, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that they might already be too late. The Emperor's fleet was on the move, and they had no idea what kind of devastation awaited them. All they could do was hope that their actions on the Zorgon homeworld had bought them enough time and that the Risian defenses would hold. Charles gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white with tension. One way or another, this war was coming to a head, and he would fight to his last breath to ensure that humanity and the Risians emerged victorious. Charles and Lyra's stolen fighter screamed into Risia's atmosphere, the once pristine blue skies now choked with the acrid smoke of burning forests and cities. Zorgon warships hung in low orbit, disgorging swarms of fighters and troop transports, their hulls glinting in the harsh sunlight. Below, the verdant jungles that had once blanketed the planet were now charred and lifeless, the victim of relentless orbital bombardment. The Risian villages, once bustling with life and laughter, lay in ruins, their luminescent trees shattered and dying. Charles gripped the controls tighter as they approached the ruins of the capital village, where Thax and the remaining Risian defenders had made their last stand. The ground was littered with the broken bodies of both Risian and Zorgon warriors, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. As they landed amidst the rubble, Thax emerged from a makeshift bunker, his fur matted with blood and dirt. "Thank the stars you've returned," he rasped, clasping Charles's arm. "We cannot hold out much longer." Charles nodded grimly, taking in the haggard faces of the Risian survivors. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but he could see the determination burning in their eyes. They would fight to the last, for their homes and their freedom. "Lyra, I need you to take your best snipers and set up positions on the high ground," Charles ordered, his mind racing with tactical possibilities. "Target their officers and supply lines. We need to disrupt their command structure." Lyra nodded, her luminescent eyes flashing with purpose. She gathered a group of Risian warriors, their rifles slung over their shoulders, and melted into the ruins. Charles turned to Thax. "Show me what you've captured from the Zorgons. We need every advantage we can get." Thax led him to a battered hangar, where a hulking Zorgon mech suit stood. its armored plates scarred from battle. "We managed to take this down in the last assault," Thax explained, "but none of us can pilot it." Charles ran his hand over the mech's surface, a plan forming in his mind. "I can," he said simply. He clambered into the cockpit, the controls unfamiliar but intuitive. The mech hummed to life, its reactor thrumming with barely contained power. With Charles at the helm of the captured mech and Lyra's snipers in position, the Rizian defenders launched a fierce counterattack. Charles charged into the heart of the Zorgan ranks, the mech's massive fists and energy cannons scattering the insectoid warriors like leaves in a storm. Lyra's snipers rained death from above, their luminescent camouflage rendering them all but invisible among the ruins. Zorgon officers fell, their command structure crumbling under the precise onslaught. For days the battle raged, the Rizians fighting with a ferocity born of desperation. Charles became a rallying point, his mech a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. The Zorgons learned to fear the sight of the war machine, its human pilot a demon of vengeance. But just as victory seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. The Zorgan Emperor himself descended to the battlefield, encased in a mech of his own. Wielding a devastating energy weapon, he carved a path of destruction through the Rizian ranks, their warriors falling before him like wheat before a scythe. Charles engaged the Emperor in single combat, their mechs clashing in a titanic struggle. The Emperor's machine was more advanced, its weaponry more powerful, but Charles had something the Zorgan leader lacked: the indomitable human spirit. As they dueled across the ruined landscape, Lyra led a hand-picked team on a desperate mission. Fighting their way through the embattled streets, they infiltrated the landing site of the Emperor's command ship. The vessel was a monstrosity of metal and chitin, its hull bristling with weapons. Lyra and her saboteurs breached the ship's defenses, planting explosives at key structural points. But as they made their escape, Zorgon security forces surged to stop them. A brutal firefight erupted in the command ship's corridors, the Rizians fighting for every inch. Lyra's team held the line, buying her precious seconds to arm the final detonator. She sprinted for the exit, plasma bolts sizzling past her head, and leaped from the ship just as the explosives tore it apart. The command ship exploded in a blinding flash, raining debris onto the battlefield below. The Emperor, momentarily distracted by the destruction of his vessel, let out a roar of rage. He redoubled his assault on Charles, his mech's blows fueled by hatred and fury. Both mechs were heavily damaged now, sparks and fluids leaking from rent armor plates. The fight devolved into a brutal melee, the two warriors grappling and pummeling each other with armored fists. Charles, drawing on every ounce of his strength and skill, finally forced the Emperor's mech to its knees. With a final, desperate blow, he shattered the cockpit canopy and dragged the Zorgon ruler from his shattered war machine. The Emperor lay broken at Charles's feet, his carapace cracked and oozing. Around them the battle stuttered to a halt as both sides realized the magnitude of what had occurred. The Zorgon forces, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat in disarray. Charles stood atop his battered mech, Lyra and the surviving Rizians gathering around him. They had won the day, but the cost had been staggering. The once beautiful planet lay in ruins, its jungles burned and its cities shattered. The luminescent trees were dark, their light extinguished by the ravages of war. But even amidst the destruction, there was a flicker of hope. The Rizians, beaten but unbroken, looked to Charles and Lyra as the leaders who had saved their world. The rebuilding would be long and painful, but with the Zorgon threat finally broken, they had a chance to heal and regrow. Charles looked to Lyra, her fur matted with blood and soot, her eyes shining with unshed tears. In that moment, he realized that his place was here, among the Rizians, fighting for a future free from the yoke of tyranny. The battle was over, but the war for the galaxy's soul had only just begun. In the wake of the Emperor's defeat, Charles and Lyra worked tirelessly to help the Rizians rebuild their shattered world. They salvaged technology from the fallen Zorgon warships, using it to construct new homes, repair infrastructure, and bolster the planet's defenses. Charles taught the Rizians how to operate and maintain the advanced equipment, ensuring they could stand on their own. But as the weeks turned into months, a new threat emerged from within the Rizian ranks. Zash, a battle-hardened warrior with a fierce loyalty to his people, began to gather support for a radical plan. He argued that the Rizians should use the captured Zorgon weapons to establish their own empire, conquering other worlds to ensure their survival. "We have seen what happens when we are weak," Zash declared, his voice ringing out over a crowd of Rizians. "The Zorgons nearly destroyed us. We must become strong, so that no one can threaten us again." Charles and Lyra, along with Thax and Zane, vehemently opposed Zash's vision. They argued that the Rizians had always valued peace and harmony, and that using the Zorgon weapons for conquest would betray everything they stood for. "We cannot become like the Zorgons," Lyra pleaded, her luminescent eyes shining with conviction. "If we use their weapons to dominate others, we will lose our souls." But Zash was charismatic and persuasive, and his message of strength and security resonated with many Rizians who had lost loved ones in the war. Tensions rose, until finally, violence erupted. Zash and his followers seized control of the Zorgon weapons, turning them against anyone who opposed their rule. Charles and his allies found themselves fighting their former comrades, a bitter and painful conflict that tore the Rizian society apart. Brother fought against brother, friend against friend, as the civil war raged across the planet. In a final desperate battle, Charles confronted Zash in the heart of the Rizian capital. The two warriors faced each other, energy blades humming in their hands. They clashed in a duel that was both physical and ideological, each fighting for their vision of the Rizian future. Zash was a formidable opponent, his blade skills honed by a lifetime of combat. But Charles drew on his human ingenuity, feinting and dodging, looking for an opening. When Zash overextended on a lunge, Charles seized his chance, striking a fatal blow to the Rizian's chest. As Zash lay dying, his luminescent blood pooling on the ground, he looked up at Charles with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "I only wanted to protect our people," he rasped, his breath coming in short gasps. "I feared that without the weapons, we would be vulnerable to future invasions." Charles knelt beside his fallen foe, a wave of exhaustion and disillusionment washing over him. He realized that the cycle of violence and conquest would never end unless someone chose to break it. "I understand your fear," Charles said softly, "but we cannot let it control us. We must find another way." In the days that followed, Charles and Lyra worked to convince the Rizians to destroy the remaining Zorgon weapons. They argued that true strength came from cooperation and diplomacy, not from the barrel of a gun. Lyra, now a respected leader among her people, supported Charles's vision. She helped to forge a new path for the Rizians, one based on the principles of peace and understanding. As the Rizian society began to heal, Charles knew that his work on the planet was done. He prepared to return to Earth, to share the story of the Rizian struggle and advocate for a future of cooperation between their worlds. In a bittersweet farewell, Charles stood before the luminescent trees of the Rizian village. Lyra and the others gathered around him. He looked into their faces, seeing the pain and loss they had endured, but also the hope and determination that now shone in their eyes. "I will never forget what we fought for here," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will carry your story back to Earth, and I will work every day to build a future where our peoples can live in peace." Lyra stepped forward, clasping Charles's hand in her own. "We will always be grateful for what you have done," she said. "You have shown us that we are stronger together than we ever could be apart." Charles boarded his ship, the engines humming to life. As he blasted off into the star-flecked sky, he looked back at the Rizian planet, forever changed by his influence. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.